Hey there guys, today we're taking a look at World of Tanks running on the AMD Ryzen 5 5500U. Now this is currently running at 1080p with the lowest graphical preset. And of course this is paired with the 16GB of RAM, and as we can see the RAM usage is relatively high in the sense that the 16GB of RAM is clearly a benefit here because we're using almost 7GB just from running this game. So if we were actually still at the 8GB of RAM that we were before, we would be running into issues because half of that is just used by like Windows running. So you're pretty much left with usually just maybe 4 at most 5GB to work with when you have only 8GB of RAM. So in this situation we're using as much RAM as the game needs, and there's still plenty left for the system and any other programs you might want to be running on the side. In terms of performance and the actual gaming experience, we're having an absolute blast here. We are getting a completely above 60 FPS experience here. We're getting into the hundreds of frames. This is pretty much the ideal experience that you want while playing this game. You do have the headroom to start to turn up the graphical settings, but for this game I really just don't like doing that. For a lot of these types of games I actually find it easier to just play them with the lowest graphics settings. As long as the render distance is set properly for any game like this, lowest settings is almost always the best way to go, just because you're going to maximize your FPS, you're going to avoid the potential of any possible stutters, and it actually makes it a lot easier to spot enemies from a distance, because when everything around you is just low quality, things kind of just stand out a lot more. So you are of course welcome to just mess around with the settings and find what actually suits you, but at least running at the settings that I would actually play this game at, this is running absolutely perfectly. If we had an external 144Hz monitor, we would actually be having an absolute blast with that. So that is an option here. And for a lot of these esports type titles and these lighter games like this that kind of just run on almost anything, having a monitor like that actually makes the entire experience a lot better, because you're actually able to fully utilize that FPS. And I'm by no means surprised that this is running this well on here, because this game has just been known to run on pretty much any kind of system that you throw at it. So if this is one of those games that you really like to sink your time into, this is a game that you really enjoy, you're going to be able to play it perfectly fine here, and you might even legitimately consider actually getting a external monitor to play this on, because like if this is all you play, or you mostly just play lighter esports titles, it just makes a lot more sense to just hook this up to a 144Hz monitor and have a blast playing on here. But I understand that there's a lot of people out there that just cannot really afford either the cost of the monitor, or really they're just space limited. Here in the United States, everything is kind of just ginormous. Houses are big, everything just takes up ungodly amounts of space, so you kind of end up in a situation where it's feasible for people to have just 3, 4, 5, 6 monitor setups. But there's a lot of smaller eastern countries that end up in a lot of smaller housing units, a lot of smaller apartments, stuff like that, where space is very limited, and realistically speaking you might not have the room to dedicate a 24-inch monitor, but you might be able to use your 15-inch laptop. And in those situations this game is perfectly fine on here. The laptop screen itself actually supports FreeSync from a range of 45 to 60 Hertz, so if you just lock the FPS to 60, you're pretty much just going to be able to have a completely screen tearing free experience. But really I would kind of just leave it as it is right now, uncapped, and just enjoy the lack of any excess input lag from that. It's really just going to be the best experience. And while I personally don't really like the screen on here too much for first-person shooters that are more competitive, just because of the fact that a cheap IPS screen is inherently just going to have a larger delay than even cheap TN panels, just because inherently the technology introduces more input lag and response time lag. Still, overall it's not a terrible experience. You're going to be able to play this game perfectly fine on here, and you're going to be able to have a good time. But if you have been thinking about what you can do to kind of just improve your overall gaming experience while gaming on almost exclusively on a laptop, I would really recommend thinking about picking up at least a cheap 144Hz display. You don't need to go crazy with it. I'm not asking you to just pick up like one of those really high quality IPS displays that have response times that actually are competitive with TN panels or anything like that. Those are ridiculously expensive. You really don't need to go that route. But you can find some very nice 144Hz monitors out there that are around the $150 range. And while that might be expensive for some people, I mean, realistically speaking, for a lot of people, just suddenly dropping $150 on a display might just be something that they really have to think about. I would really consider doing it because, again, monitors are not the same thing as laptops. A laptop I can understand being hesitant to buy because it has a set expiration date, especially cheaper laptops. That's why when going with cheap laptops, I like to mostly recommend sticking with companies companies like HP, Dell, and Lenovo. I like the gateway laptops that Walmart has just because of how price competitive they are. But realistically speaking, if you're someone who is very strapped for cash, things just like getting money to fix whatever goes wrong might be difficult for you, then I would go for these more name brand laptops. It is the fact that you could find replacement parts and cheap replacement parts online a lot easier for these big brand laptops. So it's definitely something to consider there. But when you get a monitor kind of just lasts you for a very long time. I have a old 144 hertz monitor. It's a TN panel that I've had for years now. Like at this point, I think I've had it for maybe 6-7 years and it still works perfectly fine. Yeah, the color accuracy of it is just dog water compared to what you can get nowadays, even from cheaper panels. But being a TN panel, it actually has a very, very good response time. And I had a lot of trouble replacing it as a completely dedicated gaming monitor until I actually bought a 27-inch 1440p 144 hertz LG IPS display that pretty much, like, I only really bought it because I found it open boxed on Amazon for just $200, but its normal retail price was like $300, $350, something like that. And that's a ridiculous price to pay for something to pair with a laptop that is just going to be $500. Obviously, I don't use it for a $500 laptop. I actually have like a dedicated gaming PC, and that's what I use it for. But it's definitely one of those things where you don't need to get that to have an enjoyable gaming experience on here. You can get a cheap 144 hertz monitor and have a blast on here. In fact, I'm gonna link some of the ones that I've actually used and recommended to friends before down below. And honestly, it's one of those things where whatever holidays are celebrated in your country where you have like massive discounts, I would really consider picking up a monitor. Just if you have the room and you have the excess income for it, and it's not gonna, like, I don't want you guys eating ramen for like a month or two just to be able to get a monitor or anything like that. It's not that worth it, you know? It's one of those things where you got some extra Christmas money, you got some extra birthday money, anything like that. You just want to spruce up your setup. A monitor is going to take you a long way. And I'm just mentioning this so much because of the fact that I've actually just been testing this laptop on the external monitor a lot recently, just because I wanted to see what the experience would be like in a lot of these esports titles, if we can actually get a high refresh rate experience. And I mean, honestly, yeah, you can. There are a lot of titles where you're going to actually be able to fully utilize that 144 hertz, and I think it's worth it. I genuinely think it's worth it. I would take that over practically any other upgrade because it's what's going to genuinely enhance your gaming experience. But anyways, I hope you guys found this video useful. Obviously, it kind of just went on a little bit of a tangent there, but it's one of those things where I really recommend getting the monitor. Obviously, check the links down below to see what kind of deals are out there. You can always find some cheap monitors like that, and do not be afraid to look at your used market. You just might be able to find some crazy deals there, but this game runs beautifully on this system. I really honestly just recommend playing it on here. But anyways, if you guys found this video useful, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one.